Hey, church family, we are starting a series through the book of Exodus. And so we're up here in our podcast studio and are really excited about this upcoming series. You might wonder, why are we going through the book of Exodus? I mean, aren't there so many more relevant things we could be talking about? Why don't we go through a 10-week series on marriage or relationships or financial health or habit formation? It's the beginning of the year, right? And those are good concerns. But we really think, I've got three reasons that I think Exodus is more important, more vital than anything else we could go through at this time. This is really where we need to be. So three important reasons why we're going through Exodus. First, it's one of the greatest stories of all time, if nothing else. This story is incredible, right? It's a story that shaped the entire world, inspired countless revolutions and reforms, and a few Hollywood movies too. Some of them good, some of them, not so much. Reason number two we're going through this book is because the ancient authors help us see our cultural blind spots. C.S. Lewis says something really interesting when he talks about old books. He says this: every age has its own outlook. It's especially good at seeing certain truths and especially liable to make certain mistakes. We all, therefore, need the books that will correct the characteristic mistakes of our own period, and that means old books. So I think what C.S. Lewis is getting at here is if we're only ever reading contemporary breaking news, the Twitter feed, the blogosphere, and social media, we're really going to miss out. We're really going to only have one perspective and not have a broader view on things. And there really is no older book in your library and mine, probably, than the book of Exodus. And not only will it give us a different perspective, we believe it gives us God's perfect perspective, as we believe as Christians that this is a part of His book, the Bible. Reason number three that we're going to go through this book is the book of Exodus is ultimately about God, and our view about God impacts absolutely everything else around it. So our view of God is going to impact our marriages and our relationships and our habits and our financial spending habits and things like this. So, I mean, if you're here and you're like, man, I would have really liked a series that was a little more contemporary, a little more relevant to my life and my situation. I think that once we get a bigger, greater view of God from this book, we're gonna have that. But we're gonna have that because our view of God undergirds all these other areas of our lives, these things that are important to us. With that said, let me just say a few words about Exodus. Exodus is the second book in a 5-book series, which is often called the Pentateuch. Pentateuch means the 5 scrolls. The 5 scrolls. In the Hebrew, they call it the Torah, the instruction of God. Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And the very first word of Exodus is the word "and." Now, it's been a while since I was in first grade with Mr. Kriz, but Mr. Kriz always told me never to start a sentence with the word "and." And that was repeated all throughout school, that you don't start your sentences with the word "and." That is a no-no. It's not a thing you're supposed to do. And you certainly shouldn't start your essay with the word "and." Or a book. That's unheard of, right? That's bad grammar or syntax or whatever you call that when you put an "and" at the beginning. Well, why does the author of Exodus do this? Well, the "and" very clearly connects us back to Genesis. Even though there was a 400-year gap between Genesis and Exodus, the "and" shows us we're just continuing the story that we already went through. So real quickly, I want to point us back to a few of the themes of Genesis that are also going to be repeated through the book of Exodus. So we're going to talk about God's good plan and how He works that plan out providentially. We're going to talk about how God keeps His promises He made hundreds of years earlier. We're going to talk about God's presence in times of trouble. We're going to talk about how God is committed to working with messed up people. Can I get an amen? Right? If you're messed up like me, you're in the right place. We're going to talk about God's deliverance from bondage, from slavery and sin, that we're free from certain things and free for certain things. We're going to talk about sacrifice, which is the redemption on behalf of someone else. We're going to talk about God's power, and we're going to talk about worship and the Sabbath and rest and work. So I'm really excited about this series. I hope you are too. I hope this is a real turning point that you'll look 10 years from now, you'll look back on this series and it really impacted your heart and your mind. Well, that's all we have for today. Please tune in, check out our sermons through the Exodus series, and remember, we have recorded and video teachings at each campus. So if you want to follow along, dive deeper, we are starting Exodus 1 this Sunday.